minutes for the purposes of an opening statement. Mr. Guthrie.
Thank you, Chair DeGette, and for holding this important hearing about the COVID-19 vaccine pathway. Ultimately, it will be a vaccine that offers us the best chance to finally end this pandemic, allowing our nation to fully reopen. But it is not just the vaccine itself. In addition to an approved or authorized vaccine, we will need widespread acceptance, distribution, and immunization to successfully combat this virus. The purpose of this bipartisan hearing should be to increase public confidence in the Food and Drug Administration and its processes for authorizing and approving vaccines through science-based decisions that there is greater vaccine acceptance and confidence among Americans. Congress, through this committee, created the Emergency Use Authorization pathway as part of Project BioShield Act in 2004, and later expanded that pathway in the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Reauthorization Act of 2013 on a bipartisan basis. Through those efforts, we provided special authority to the FDA to be used in a public health emergency prior to a full approval when the scientific evidence is available to support such use. To receive an emergency use authorization, or EUA, a drug company must demonstrate that based on the totality of scientific evidence, the drug's known or unknown potential benefits outweigh the known and potential risks. The FDA can apply that standard appropriately to different settings, such as requiring more rigorous evidence for treatments used on healthier populations than for seriously ill hospitalized patients. For COVID-19 vaccines, the FDA has announced it is using an EUA plus approach through a guidance setting a much more stringent standard than for other EUAs. Unfortunately, I have grave concern that some are trying to score political points by irresponsibly criticizing the FDA and its vaccine review and approval process, potentially undermining trust in the FDA authorized vaccine, especially during this global pandemic and national health emergency. It is understandable in this politicized environment that many in the public will be concerned or confused about the vaccine development and approval process, where the corners are being cut and whether these unfounded criticisms circulating. The truth of the matter is that the review and approval stages of the vaccine will be controlled throughout the process by non-political, independent, scientific experts, not politicians. The data produced during the vaccine clinical trials are reviewed and evaluated by a data safety monitoring board, which is composed of independent scientific experts. In addition, there is a FDA Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee composed of independent, leading medical experts who are expected to review and evaluate data on the vaccines in public meetings. Indeed, even Congress has contributed getting assurances on the scientific decision from the FDA. It was this committee's full committee hearing in June and other committee hearings over the past few months where Congress and the American people received assurances from FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn that he would support his career scientists and the FDA would not cut corners on the safety or efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines. The intense scrutiny has led to other extraordinary pledges from the highly respected public health officials. Dr. Peter Marks, the director of FDA's Center for Biologics, said he will resign his position if the FDA were to greenlight an unproven coronavirus vaccine. In addition, the director of National Institutes of Health, Dr. Francis Collins, and the director of National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci, have said they will only back a vaccine that has science behind it. Further, 9 drug companies have already pledged they will not submit vaccine candidates for FDA review until their safety and efficacy is shown in large clinical trials. In addition, each of the 4 companies who are now in phase 3 clinical trials have published their clinical trial protocols. For vaccine distribution, 2 independent committees will provide guidance: the National Academies of Science and Engineering and Medicine and CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. I urge each of us to put politics aside. I know we're a few weeks from election, but put politics aside in order to deliver one unified, life-saving message that Americans can trust the FDA's vaccine approval process. And it will be driven by the science and will result in science-based decisions. And lastly, a reminder for everybody to get your flu shot. It has been this year, it will be more important than ever. I've already received my flu shot. I look forward to the testimony from these esteemed witnesses and welcome them to this hearing, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I got my flu shot too, and I echo what you say. Everybody should get their flu shot. Chair now will.
Thank you very much for the recognition. And Dr. Offit, I want to thank you for your testimony and also what you just said just a few minutes ago, that you really have a lot of confidence in the FDA scientists, the FDA advisory committee, independent data monitoring committee that really have strong guardrails in place. And a couple of other witnesses seem to say that they are in place, but we still need to, I don't know what, they could go off rails, I guess. And I'm just concerned that we're going to say things and not have people confident about vaccines. We already had a hearing on measles about vaccine hesitancy, and it's something that I think, Dr. Harvey, you said that the scientists would scream and yell if something like that happened. And so we need to make sure that people can have confidence when a safe and effective vaccine is approved by the FDA, it will be safe and effective. And so hopefully we can keep our rhetoric going that direction. But Dr. McClellan, in that point, because we really need to be that direction, I'd like to ask you, if the vaccine manufacturers apply for an emergency use authorization prior to submitting a biologics license application or BLA, what kinds of extensive scientific data would the companies have to provide to the FDA about the safety and performance of the vaccines for the EUA? And how similar are those packages to be submitted under the FDA's gold standard pre-approval process for the BLA? Did you get all of that?
I think so. Representative, I had a chance to talk with Dr. Peter Marks at a public event last night where he reiterated that he expects the evidence for safety and effectiveness for the vaccine approved under an EUA to be very similar to that for a full approval. Remember that full approval includes a lot of additional documentation, thousands and thousands of pages, dealing with a lot of issues like, is the vaccine going to be stable on a shelf for the next 6 months? That is not the context that we're concerned about here. And to make sure all of this is not only reviewed fully by the FDA, as Dr. Offit said, there will be an advisory committee meeting for each vaccine that comes forward with an emergency use application, for the FDA to write a written review for discussion with these expert independent advisors about whether the vaccine standards are being met. And I have full trust not only in the FDA staff to do that right, but people like Dr. Offit, who have been doing this for years and have tremendous amount of experience with vaccine safety, including for vaccines used in infants. And after that, FDA will write a written basis for its decision. And then, even before it's used, it's going to go to another independent review by the CDC's Immunization Practices Committee. So those are a lot of steps that people should be looking for in terms of transparency and independent regulatory expertise, scientific expertise, all coming to bear to make sure we got the right sufficient amount of evidence on safety and effectiveness.
And my guess it'll be pretty transparent if we don't follow those pathways. Can you explain why the EAU for COVID-19 vaccine would be different than the EAU for a COVID-19 therapeutic?
It's a very different context, and as you know from working on these issues over years, the emergency use authorization was implemented to give FDA flexibility to respond as needed in a public health emergency. And so, as you mentioned earlier, it's about the totality of the evidence in a particular context. So in the context of something like convalescent plasma, where the treatment's been around for 100 years, been used in many different infections, it's on the market now, it's been used in thousands of sick COVID patients with no significant evidence of safety side effects. Now, we don't have good evidence on benefits, and that's where I think some of the political leadership got it wrong when they were characterizing what the FDA career staff's decision was here. They made it sound like it was a clear beneficial treatment. But what we're talking about is a treatment that's already being used for people who are hospitalized, that the evidence shows is not harmful. And that kind of expanded access is something that FDA has a tradition of doing for unmet medical needs and people who are very high risk while evidence is being developed. I hope we get a clinical trial done more comprehensively to answer this question, but it's a very, very different context than a new vaccine used in people who are not sick, who are trying to keep well.
Okay, and then finally, I have just a few seconds, but can you explain why EAU, or could you what the FDA's guidance is for COVID-19 vaccine that gives you confidence. There will be strong science behind any decision made, and then any safeguards outside of the FDA to make sure you have confidence. So I want to end with the next 15 seconds of why you're confident we'll have a safe and effective vaccine when it's safe.
We've already covered that. There's a whole checklist, I think, that we've already talked about of public events and writings that will be coming from the FDA staff before any decision is made. Make sure that happens, and let's inform the public about that. And as you pointed out earlier, all of the vaccine manufacturers have said they are going to follow this process. And even though this FDA written guidance on EUA hasn't been released, believe me, all the manufacturers know what's in it. And Dr. Marks and the FDA staff, again yesterday, just reiterated again publicly what all is in it. So we've also got a lot of independent experts, other agencies. It's a very robust process that's been developed over decades because vaccine safety is so important.
Thank you. This is important. Appreciate it. Appreciate it, Madam Chair, and I yield back.